everybody. Welcome to Women in Retail Talks. I'm Melissa Campanelli, the co-founder of the Women in Retail Leadership Circle and the brand and content director for the Retail and Travel Group at NAPCO Media. I'm really excited about our podcast today as we have a special guest who many of you probably already know, Sucharita Kodali. She's the VP and Principal Analyst at Forrester Research. Sucharita is an expert on e-commerce, omni-channel retail, consumer behavior, and trends in the online shopping space. She's also an authority on technology developments that affect the online commerce industry and vendors that facilitate online marketing and merchandising. In her research, Sucharita covers such consumer-oriented topics as e-commerce forecasting and trends, merchandising best practices, conversion optimization, and social computing in the retail world. She's also authored The State of Retailing Online, a joint study conducted annually with NRF. So today we're going to talk about some key retail trends for retailers to keep in mind as we round out 2021 and enter 2022. So with that, let me introduce Sucharita. Hi, Sucharita.
Hi, Melissa. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for joining us.
Of course.
At this busy time. So we really appreciate you taking the time.
Oh, my pleasure.
I just did a little bit of an opening there, and I'm just going to start with the basics. I mean, what are some key retail trends that retailers you believe should keep in mind right now?
Well, I think that it's the big one, which is, of course, the pandemic and COVID, and the fact that it doesn't seem to be going away. And it just forces, I think, the constant agility that we have become really accustomed to in the last year and a half. So I think that what we can expect is the unexpected. We don't know what tomorrow brings, and we don't know if there's going to be future surges. We don't know if there may be shelter at home orders, at least in some regions of the country or the world. And to that end, every retailer, every merchant needs to be able to adapt and be able to turn on things like omni-channel order capabilities, or how do you tap into extended assortments. And of course, one of the things that we learned in this last year was the impact, just how interconnected our entire supply chain is. And of course, the pandemic exacerbated that. So the importance of being able to source things from alternative, destinations, or to be able to divert consumers to new products or substitute products. And another thing, of course, that came out this year, which was different than years past and different actually from many decades of behavior, is inflation and the impact that has had psychologically, almost in retail more than anything. I was looking at some data today, and grocery sales, as an example, grocery inflation in the last year, the grocery prices are up 6%, but 77% of people say that they've noticed an increase in grocery prices. And I contrast that with, kind of virtually, kind of every other category where, like let's take gasoline as an example, where gasoline has been up almost 50%, but yet fewer people have noticed that increase in pricing. So, so I think that retailers just have to be really conscious of the fact that they may be in categories where people are extremely wary to spend because of this psychological impact that, oh my gosh, I'm overpaying.
Yeah, I have been reading a lot about that, not only grocery, but it seems like it's just kind of going up all around. Even online prices, I've heard, in general, are going up. So that is something I think retailers need to be aware of, that specifically that consumers are aware of it as well. I think is really interesting. Will that change, you think, in 2022, or in general, how do you think retail will be different in 2022? I mean, Omicron and COVID is still happening. What are some ways it might be different. So maybe in some ways it might be the same.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that, kind of that's exactly it. There are going to be some things that are going to be very similar. We're going to continue to have a lot of omni-channel. We're going to have a lot of in-store pickup or curbside pickup capabilities. That's what a lot of people are going to insist on. Every data point that we've seen in the last, since the beginning of the pandemic has had almost without fail a third of people saying that they try to avoid going into stores. And that's higher for usually the coastal, more liberal regions. So that is, that hasn't changed. And I actually think that that's probably not going to change until we are absolutely confident that we're past the pandemic. And, kind of even with vaccines, the vaccines only last a few months, or they only last, until the next variant comes along. And that's part of what has kept that third of people, kind of ordering online and or insisting on some of these, kind of capabilities like curbside pickup. So those absolutely will stay the same. What I think will be different is just far more just continued agility. And that's something that I think came, really, really stood out in the last, since the beginning of the pandemic, is that retailers, in my experience, had historically been pretty slow to move. There were often these onerous departments of no in every organization. And what the pandemic forced was really quickly to change and to do things that you never thought were possible, and to get rid of the barriers that were often just internal, kind of naysayers, that I think historically, kind of had existed, but now I think that we'll continue to see more changes. So maybe, the integration of things like retailer media networks in bigger and bigger ways. We may see, kind of marketplaces and even more aggressive dropship programs in bigger and bigger ways. So all of the things that we've been talking about for years, but that retailers maybe hadn't embraced or they didn't have budgets to embrace, I think that now we'll likely finally see that. We may see coalition loyalty programs because, retailers are, desperate to grow sales. And that could be a way to achieve that.
Interesting. Yeah. Again, it's all about being agile, being creative. It's sort of like following up with what happened since the pandemic began. The one thing that was obviously a huge topic all over the retail industry over the past 12 months, I guess, is the supply chain issues that retailers are facing. Mm-hmm. Do you think that these will continue? I've been hearing mixed things. Some people say, it's almost over. Some people are saying it's going to continue through 2022. So what's your feeling about that? And then, how are retailers working to mitigate these issues?
It's interesting because I think that there are different parts of the supply chain, right? I mean, there's everything from the raw materials to the factories, mm-hmm. to the container ships to, the transportation of the products to the last mile, and the line hauls, and kind of all of the domestic transportation elements. And each of those has a different story. I don't know that it is, and some of those have absolutely cleared up, like a lot, the container ships being stuck at, the Pacific Ocean, like there's less of that now. Like that seems to be clearing up. Like more workers in Vietnam are going back to work, whereas they hadn't, kind of in the middle months of the Delta variant because they didn't have the vaccine. So, kind of, so things are gradually changing. But I think that the big so what here, and kind of I think that there are two choices that companies have when there is a supply chain challenge like this. One is that you can diversify your supply chain, and that's a long-term solution that takes often many years, and it requires building new factories or subcontracting in different places, and that's not an overnight solution. And it may or may not even be the right answer, because at the end of the day, kind of supply chains have been optimized for cost. And, who wants to just incur extra costs if, kind of for an issue with supply chain that may come, kind of once every 10 years or, less frequently than that. So I think that some companies may be diversifying, if they can find cost effective alternatives. But if they can't, I don't see, I think that what we will end up with is a world where you just may have, kind of shortages in what you need. And the way that you accommodate that is that you suggest that people purchase alternative products. It's as simple as that. Like, I mean, even though we're, kind of, you may have a shortage, we have no shortage. You may have an individual product with a shortage. There's no shortage of products overall. And, there are, kind of often dozens of choices that can serve, kind of as an alternative, especially for end consumers, for any given consumer need, whether it is, kind of food they may need, or clothing, or, kind of a lot of the basics that they may be looking for. And so long as there is something that accommodates that goal, or others can step in and accommodate that, kind of, that's probably the best case scenario. It's like, kind of, it's sort of like, on a macro level, what happened with masks last year, which is, we were caught, kind of with, completely shorthanded with masks. And what you had was like shortages of masks for a couple of critical months, which was why we had shelter at home orders, which was one of the reasons we had shelter at home orders. But then what happened was that you had all manner of companies, ranging from like Vera Bradley to Brooks Brothers, stepping up with their domestic production facilities to be those solutions. And, Etsy, I mean, so many companies doing that. And I think that that's, kind of what will happen more in the future is, and that's another part of agility in the supply chain, is the ability to be creative. And, if you see a gap in the market, you step in.
Yeah. So what about some other issues that retailers are facing right now? Like, for instance, I know there's a lot of talk about, the iOS 14 and privacy changes and how that affects like customer acquisition for retailers, specifically smaller retailers. The Great Resignation keeps coming up in some of our calls with our members. Are those major issues, have you found as well? And what can retailers do about them?
Well, certainly, employee retention is a recurring issue. And I think that is something that was likely coming because there's so many people who through the pandemic may have used some extra time they had to upskill. There does seem to be such a preponderance of technology, especially jobs. So anybody in digital certainly seems to have the ability to find other roles. And kind of even amongst blue collar work, just the fact that for a variety of reasons, people don't want to do those jobs. These companies have been forced to pay more for them. So I think there's a lot of griping about kind of the Great Resignation. But I think that this is largely because we've been underpaying workers for so long, and it's about time that it's almost like the effect of unionization without a union. And kind of, I say, more power to workers. We've had kind of income inequality that has been increasing for years, and if this finally forces employers to pay a little bit more, that's not a bad thing. So I'm not actually, kind of, as an industry, the retail industry, does need to account for this, but at a macro level, it's not a bad thing for society. As far as privacy concerns are, I actually think that it's much ado about nothing. And I think that so many of these whether it is Google or whether it's Facebook, these large digital media companies have gotten so much credit for transactions they've driven that are not truly incremental, that if this makes them work a little bit harder to get marketing dollars, then that's actually a good thing for everybody as well. And I think that the magic, the part that we have to look at really, really carefully is not whether or not ROAS changes, because who cares about ROAS? ROAS is like, some, ad agency engineered metric that, kind of is designed to make advertising media dollars look effective. What is the true metric is, are your sales growing overall? And if your sales are still fine, that suggests that maybe you were wasting money on advertising in the first place. Now, what I want to see is, how many people how many companies actually see their sales numbers go down and they can tie it back to kind of this supposed inability to target. I really, really want to see that, because the only things that I've seen are like a few, kind of angry tweets from people who want to keep targeting, but they can't actually show any actual data that their sales are down. All they show is ROAS is down. And it's like, well, yes, ROAS is going to be down, but, are your sales down? Because if your sales are the same, it doesn't matter if your ROAS is down.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I guess I hear mixed things about it, but that's actually helpful that you have that perspective. I'm sure it will be to others listening as well. Well, I mean, it sounds like we covered most of the issues that are kind of challenges, I should say, that retailers are dealing with right now. But is there something that you're excited about when it comes to retail in 2022? Is there something that you're looking forward to, or that you feel like retailers should be excited about or celebrating?
Well, I think that one of the big changes that we've seen in business is this push toward stakeholder capitalism, which is, kind of doing and engaging in business for the good of more than just a shareholder. It's about making sure that you are not hurting the environment, that you're not hurting employees, that you're not hurting a community, that you're not hurting suppliers, that you're paying fair wages, all of those things. And it is, I think, a really, really fascinating and interesting movement. However, I think that the measurement of it is terrible right now, and I hope that, and there's finally some spotlights being shown on some of the particularly egregious ESG measurement companies, because literally all they're looking at is, they're not looking at whether or not you're actually doing good for the climate. They're looking at whether or not you're protected from climate risk, which are very, very different things. And I'm, kind of, for the good of society, I'm less interested. We should all be less interested if you are protected from climate risk. It should be, well, I mean, I suppose that, kind of that is an important byproduct, but you should not get credit for being protected from climate risk unless you are also doing good for climate management as well. And what I think that we'll start to see more of is, we'll see somebody eventually, kind of start to measure companies based on that. The B Corp framework already essentially does that. So I suspect what may eventually happen is that someone will take some of the broad strokes of the B Corp framework and just basically apply it to public companies, publicly traded companies, and that will be the better metric. And kind of, if you have a really, really bad score, people will hope, in the same way that, kind of, you may taste good, but, kind of, if you're, just a really unhealthy product, people don't buy it as much anymore. I think it'll be the same thing with stocks. But we don't have that fair metric of nutritional content of a stock yet.
That's interesting. Wow. But so do you think that's going to happen in 2022, or?
I think it may start. We saw an announcement from Unilever a few months ago that they were trying to do essentially that, like the carbon, I think it was the carbon footprint of, all of their products, or some kind of an ESG score, probably more environmental and the carbon footprint, that they were literally going to start putting on all of their products. And it was supposed to be rolled out by, I think, about this time. So I think if we start to see more of that and somebody has a really, really good user interface that's attractive and kind of is easy for consumers to follow, I think we will see much more of that. There'll be more consumer pushes toward that. But there, kind of it's a great idea, and I don't think it's going away. But I think that kind of we do need to get away from the greenwashing. We need to start asking questions about kind of what is really the cost of everything that we purchase, that we consume, that is made, because even when you look at things like same day delivery, or kind of packages coming from 1,000 miles away overnight, you do have to wonder, you should wonder, what's the carbon footprint of that, because that doesn't seem like that's the smartest thing, and it's not. and we
Right.
should be more critical of kind of consumption like that.
Yep, that's really interesting. So yeah, 2022 is sort of like going to be maybe the year of sustainability or something for retailers, hopefully.
I hope so.
Yeah. Well, anyway, this has been so great, Sucharita. I think we're running a little bit out of time, but it's so great to catch up with you. I love doing these sort of end of year, sort of looking ahead kinds of podcasts. I think they're really helpful. You gave such a great overview of everything.
Of course.
I also want to thank everyone who's listening to this edition of Women in Retail Talks as well. For more information on this podcast, please check out our podcast channel page at womeninretail.com/podcasts, where we'll have some show notes. Women in Retail Talks is available on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, and Spotify. And please make sure to subscribe on our podcast channel page. Finally, if you've enjoyed the episode, please take a few moments to rate and review it. So until next time, thank you so much. This has been Women in Retail Talks.